Modern sociology can be broken into three main schools of thought: structural functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism. Structural functionalism is the theory that the central function of the various aspects of a society is to maintain the social structure, the society's pattern of social relations and institutions. Much of this theory is a combination of the scientific method and a connection between the individual and society. A French sociologist, Émile Durkheim's writings on sociology incorporate scientific and statistical technique. It would become the basis for the structure of the functionalism theory. In functionalism, one must use the positivistic view in order to look at society. Basically, it's thinking without value or emotion in mind. The whole basis for this theory is the social system. The social system is people doing their part for a larger system, i.e. something like religion, that have functions that contribute to the survival of the community. Talcott Parsons, a popular sociologist in the 1950s and 60s, viewed the world as having many social systems within each other. Within these social systems, the people want a homeostatic nature. Societies want to remain in equilibrium, or balance, with the various social systems and institutions. They do so with the socialization of the members or citizens with values and norms in the hopes to reach a consensus of ideas. A society will also have social control mechanisms, such as schools, prisons, or asylums, which are used to fix any radicals that could pose a problem to the consensus. Most changes to the society are from natural growth and evolution, but can also occur from outside forces. Many sociologists analyze how the society in which an individual lives in molds their limits and decisions. Probably the most famous sociologist is Robert Merton. He distinguished the difference between functions and dysfunctions, as well as manifest functions and latent functions. A function is anything that's positive for society, whereas a dysfunction is anything negative for society. Manifest and latent functions are both part of functions and dysfunctions. A manifest function is an intended action. A latent function is an unknown consequence of the function. An example of a manifest and latent function might be that a law is being passed through Congress. The manifest function is exactly what the law says it'll do. It's the intended consequence. Perhaps what the law does ends up killing a bunch of people, but no one knew about this consequence prior to the law being passed. This would be a latent function. Conflict theory goes back to the German theorist and political activist Karl Marx. Marx believed that one's work was their purpose and that everything of value in life is a result from human labor. Marx was alive in the 19th century, and during that time, most of Europe was being dictated by capitalism. The small minority of the people, the owners, or the bourgeoisie, had the majority of the money, and the majority of the people, the workers, or proletariat, had nothing. Marx saw the workers exploited by their owners with material forces of production or means of production, which include capital, land, and labor. The workers weren't being paid enough for the work that they were doing. A superstructure is when the economy of a state determines the ideas such as morality, ideologies, art, and literature, and the social structures, the state, the educational system, the family, and religious institutions. When the economy is capitalistic, the superstructure's focus is on the rich. Most superstructures of the time had capitalistic political oppression. In a state where capitalism allows an economic gap between the poor and rich, the government becomes a plutonomy. A plutonomy is a system where the growth of the country is influenced by the activities of the wealthy minority. Karl Marx created the Marxist dialectical method, which is focusing on how a thesis acquires its antithesis and the new social form that emerges within the conflict. He believed, as evident by his dialectical method, that the economic systems would go under transformation. Just as feudalism had turned into capitalism, he predicted that capitalism would turn into socialism. Much of this theory revolves around class struggles, the contradictions with the workers and the owners having economic goals that were fundamentally at odds. Marx predicted a change in economic systems when the working class became conscious of the exploitation and would begin a socialist revolution. Unfortunately, the change from capitalism to socialism never occurred. Any communist state in history has actually been a totalitarianism, or a country ruled by a dictator. Much of our current social relations, especially in the United States, are based upon alienating and dehumanizing exploitation of the labor of the working class. Marx's conflict theory has influenced other theories such as the world systems theory, the comparative theory, as well as many of the feminist movements. Symbolic interactionism is much different than structural functionism. The theory was created by Max Weber, a German sociologist and economist, and George H. Mead, an American philosopher. They put emphasis on the subjective meaning of human behavior, the social process, and pragmatism. For this theory, it's important to understand that a symbol represents anything that carries a meaning to people who share a culture. Interactionists use the subjective view to focus on the humans more than the society. Human beings are thought of as being pragmatic actors or participants in society. Instead of norms and values, interactionists see people as having short-term negotiations that are in constant influx. These are called social processes. Herbert Blummer, who studied with Mead at the University of Chicago, is responsible for coining the term symbolic interaction, as well as for formulating the most prominent version of this theory today. Irving Goffman saw people's roles as being dramaturgical, and that they are playing a specific role, or as being improvisational, where the human creates the role that they must do. Ethnomethodology is the study of how individuals interpret conversations and gestures, and even though they don't understand each other, use common sense or create a facade to make it appear that they share a social order. Harold Garfinkel was a pioneer in ethnomethodology research. He performed breaching experiments with his students, having them ask for explanations about the content of the conversations during the conversations, thus breaking the superficial social order that might have been shared. A key part in symbolic interactionism is the participant observation. Participant observation is using first-hand information, allowing for better understanding of the means of the actions, the definition of the situation itself, and the process by which the actors construct the situation through their interaction.